This is part one of a 3-video series about direct questions, indirect questions, and implicit questions, and specifically forming and using them in academic writing. This first video is on direct questions. It is intended as a review for things you've probably already learned about how to make direct questions in English, before videos 2 and 3 move on to indirect and implicit questions, which might be a bit more common in some kinds of academic writing. So, direct and indirect questions, they come in two varieties. There are yes-no questions, also known as polar questions. They're the ones that can be answered with a yes or no. And there are content questions, or also known as WH questions, because the words or phrases that begin them typically begin with WH, such as who, what, where, when, why, how. Although that doesn't start with WH, it still has a W and an H in there, which even longer phrases such as, for example, how long, or how expensive, or how ugly, or prepositional phrases such as at what time, or for what reason, or under what circumstances. So with that in mind, let's start forming some of these. So our first example here is alluvial diamond deposits can be analyzed as systematically as any other geological phenomenon. And I should say that this example and several others that we'll be working with are taken from exercise 4.8 in Robert Weisberg and Suzanne Bucher's book, Writing Up Research. Okay, so with that said, the two rules for direct questions in English are you have subject auxiliary inversion and a question mark at the end. So in this one, the subject, well, first we need to find the auxiliary. So I've highlighted it in green. It's can, and we'll just move that to the beginning. And notice we only move the first of these auxiliaries, this B, that stays where it is. And next, the subject, alluvial diamond deposits, gets put after the auxiliary verb, and the rest of the sentence comes down unchanged, and we finish it with a question mark. Next, subject auxiliary inversion here. Well, this time the auxiliary is a form of have. It's has. We also have been, but we just want the first one. So we take it and move it to the beginning, and then the subject goes down here, and the rest of the sentence is unchanged. Okay. And finally, finish it with a question mark. Okay, let's try another. Bacteria counts differ under transient and steady state conditions using the direct count microscopic method. Well, here we have a problem. We don't have an auxiliary verb. We only have the main verb differ. So what do? Well, if you don't have an auxiliary verb, you must supply your own, and it will be a form of do. So in this case, do, because it's present tense, and we need a plural for bacteria counts. Okay. The subject bacteria counts goes here, and then the rest of the sentence comes down unchanged. Actually, I should say that there might be a change. If this had been a singular verb, then we would take it down here and we would need to make it the plain form of the verb. Here, because it's plural, there is no change, but you might need to make a change if it's a sentence with a singular subject. Okay, now we have a slightly different complication. Again, we have no main verb, or no auxiliary verb, we just have the main verb is. However, is, and indeed any form of the verb to be, can be treated as an auxiliary verb for purposes of subject auxiliary inversion. In fact, you must treat it as an auxiliary verb. So, there, now it's an auxiliary verb. So we'll move that to the beginning. We'll take the punishment subject and put it over here after the auxiliary verb, and then the rest of the sentence comes down unchanged, and we finish it with a question mark. Okay, one last example of a direct question. This policy should have been implemented. I chose this one just to show that you might have up to maybe 3 or even more auxiliary verbs. In this case, we have should, have, been. But once again, it's just the first one that we move to the beginning. Oh, well, it looks like I decided to move the subject here. Well, okay, that's fine. There! Now we've moved the auxiliary to the beginning. And then the remaining part of the sentence is unchanged, and we finish it with a question mark. Okay, now we're going to move on to WH questions using these same examples and just adapting them a little bit. So, here's our alluvial diamond deposits again. This time, like before, we need a WH word. Oh, wait. Well, as before, we needed a subject auxiliary inversion. We need a question mark at the end. What's different now is we have a WH word or phrase at the beginning. Now, I've highlighted this phrase in red to show that it's going to be what turns into the WH word. I've turned it into how because this is describing how they might be analyzed. Okay, so that goes at the beginning. Now we still do our inversion of subject and auxiliary, so can goes there, and alluvial diamond deposits goes there, and then the last of the sentence comes down unchanged, and you finish it with a question mark. Okay, so again, WH word at the beginning. If you're answering the question, then this might turn into something like that. Okay, let's try another one. This policy has been effective. I've added something here for several reasons so that I can make that match up to a why WH word at the beginning of the sentence. So why, then our auxiliary has, and then our subject, this policy, and then the rest of the sentence. And of course, a question mark. All right, another one. Bacteria counts differ under transient and steady state conditions. I've highlighted using the direct count microscopic method. So this, it seems, is describing the circumstances when these bacteria counts might differ. So that might turn into a when WH word. Now again, we don't have an auxiliary verb, so we must supply our own. Do. And then the subject comes down here. And then the remainder of the sentence, well, you need to take your verb and find the plain form of the verb, the dictionary form, the base form, and put it down unchanged. Well, unchanged except for differ. In this case, it's the same, but you might have to change that from a singular form to a plural or a base form. Okay. And then we finish it with our question mark. Okay. Next. Now here's our example in which we just have is. We don't have an auxiliary verb, but we're going to treat it as one. So, by the way, an effective tool. So I'm going to put that as what, and then is. Now we can treat it as an auxiliary verb. There it is, and then punishment. Okay, and there is no rest of the sentence to carry down, so we just finish it with our question mark. You might wonder, well, wait a minute, is what the subject, or why do we see punishment as the subject and not what? Well, yeah, you maybe could analyze it as that if you thought the original sentence was an effective tool is punishment. But it's my video, so I'm doing it my way. But you can analyze it that way if you want to also. Okay. Now, here we have something where we really do have the subject. So what's going to happen here? WH word or phrase at the beginning and subject auxiliary inversion, but something different this time is the subject is going to be the WH phrase. So observe, this policy comes down here as which policy. So I'm just going to put another little arrow here. Well, no, first I'm going to do the auxiliary, put that down there, and the rest of the sentence unchanged. and then our question mark, and now also, just to show that this is both the subject and the WH phrase, I'm going to put a little red arrow there too. So no subject auxiliary inversion because you need the subject at the front because the subject is your WH phrase in this example. And that concludes my presentation of direct questions, both yes, no, and content varieties. In the next video, we'll talk about how to make these questions indirect.